Monetary Fund report, and also you could go to the Bank of England's website, which tells you about how banks create money out of thin air.
Chris, look, thank you. No, fair enough. I didn't really want to get into the who creates money debate, which is decades old, of course. It's been had for a long time, but I'm grateful that you explained your notion of a UBI and how you would finance it. Now, before we go, New Zealand will fall well short of its smoke-free 2025 goal, say researchers. This is a story that came out yesterday. Urgent government action required. Otago University, Auckland Māori Public Health organisation Hapai Te Hauara have told us what needs to be done. Cut the number of tobacco retail outlets to around 300. Increase tobacco tax by 20% annually for 3 years. Reduce the nicotine content. Create future tobacco-free generations. Do you support this ever more rigorous approach to stamping out smoking, gentlemen?
I certainly support that we should keep trying to do more to reduce smoking rates, absolutely, and some of the stuff like e-cigarettes have worked in the past, the tax increases have worked, but this comes into what they're effectively doing, which is calling for prohibition. With the tax increases, we've now seen the black market soar. We see every week a dairy being robbed for cigarettes. If you actually effectively, they've talked about banning sales of cigarette to anyone born before a certain age, so that age would keep lifting to 25, 30, and having it really hard to buy. You will get a black market. There's already a black market.
Sure.
Cannabis is prohibited. 50% of New Zealanders have actually tried it. So it's very well intentioned, but the law of unintended consequences, if it's about reducing smoking harm, what you're actually going to do is, unless you can deal with the demand side, where there are people who are addicted who like to smoke, you will just turn it into a great money source for gangs.
Okay, all right. Now you go, Bernard. Sorry.
If there is going to be big increases in taxes for tobacco, I think we need to make sure that the people who currently pay that are effectively compensated in one way or another. One of the big, pain issues for a lot of people at the poorer end of the spectrum is that they have much higher smoking rates, and they've borne the brunt of these really big increases in tobacco taxes in recent years. And that's one of the things you'd have to do if you are going to increase your tobacco tax 20% per year each year for 3 years, then you'd have to compensate in some way, don't know how you do it, some way so that those people who are still dependent on smoking and spending an awful lot of money don't get hammered even more than they are.
All right, I was hoping we could be a slightly more contrarian on this, although I take your points, but there's a bigger question again, isn't there? Auckland Council putting in plans in place to make beaches, urban centres, alfresco dining areas, smoke-free areas. We have started to accept the wholesale crackdown, but should we? Because there's the small matter of being allowed to do what you want to do if it's not harming anyone else. So should annoyance be enough of a reason to ban the freedoms of smokers who are choosing their own ill health through their habit? And a lot of people do it in all sorts of ways.
I think most people have accepted that where there's second-hand smoke, the Smoke-Free Environments Act, I think, has been very successful. I certainly love that I can go to the pub and restaurant now and not get second-hand smoke there. But I think you're getting on more dubious ground when you're actually saying this will apply to large outdoor areas where it's just us saying you shouldn't do this, even if it affects no one else.
All right, thank you. Last word, Bernard?
I'm a big fan of the smoke-free thing, and if you can use the nudges and the tweaks to do it, better. That's the best way.
Bernard Hickey, David Farrer have been on the panel. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Nice to have your company.
Cheers.
Thanks, everybody, for listening, and we are back tomorrow. Checkpoint with John Campbell now.
Kia ora everyone. Tonight on the programme, the chairman of the Urological Society of New Zealand describes a crisis of patient care in the urological department at Dunedin Hospital. The Prime Minister says if the DHB can't meet its targets, it should be sending patients elsewhere. We have the latest, and the government-appointed Commissioner, Kathy Grant, joins us live. Also tonight, the Auditor General, Martin Matthews, has fallen on his sword. A Taranaki skipper is convicted of manslaughter following the death of a passenger on his boat who was not wearing a life jacket. A week on from the sudden closure of Thames engineering company ANG Price, staff say they're still waiting for their final pay. And a final tribute to All Black, former All Black and Auckland Grammar principal Sir John Graham.
RNZ News at 5. Kia orana, good afternoon, ko Katrina Batanaho. The United Future leader says it was untenable for Martin Matthews to stay on as Auditor General given the outcome of an investigation into his handling of a major fraud case when he led the Transport Ministry. During his time there, Joanne Harrison, a senior manager, stole nearly $750,000. The parliamentary committee that appointed Mr Matthews as Auditor General ordered the investigation, but is refusing to release its findings publicly. However, Mr Matthews has now resigned. He apologised for the fraud committed under his watch, saying he has to take full responsibility as the chief executive at the time. But Mr Dunn says the contents of the report left Mr Matthews no choice.
It's a pretty full and devastating critique of what went on. It would have been very difficult, I think, for him to have survived that. And I think it's essentially the right thing to do to tender his resignation now.
Peter Dunn. The Prime Minister says he expects the Southern District Health Board to transfer cancer patients elsewhere if it cannot treat them itself. Checkpoint has revealed 10 Dunedin Hospital patients with prostate cancer have waited for up to 7 months for urgent surgery meant to be done within a month. The chair of the Urological Society, Stephen Mark, has described the situation as a crisis of patient care. Bill English, who visited Dunedin today, says the DHB has a clear mandate.
You need to ask the DHB. I mean, they're responsible for providing services. They've got some targets they're meant to adhere to, which represent good service for the public. And I would hope that if those 10 cases aren't getting the service here, then the DHB makes sure they get it somewhere else.
Bill English says Dunedin Hospital is not in crisis but has hard decisions to make, and Checkpoint will have more on this story after the bulletin. Meanwhile, Mr English has confirmed the rebuild of Dunedin Hospital could cost up to $1 billion. Labour's health spokesperson David Clark revealed the blowout 2 months ago, but the government would not confirm the new figure. Mr English says the new hospital could take 8 to 10 years to complete. In Auckland, patients are having cancer treatment delayed as the county's Manukau District Health Board fails to meet the targets for timely treatment. The government-set target requires 85% of people who have a high suspicion of cancer to have their first treatment within 2 months. But the latest Health Ministry figures for the 3 months till March show the DHB reached 75%. A report to the board blames the busy cold and flu season for stretching resources, but the Deputy Chief Medical Officer, Wilbur Famillo, says though some elective surgery has been delayed because of winter pressures, no cancer surgery has. He says there have been big improvements and he believes the DHB will have exceeded the target in the next set of figures. A judge has told a Taranaki boatie a conviction for manslaughter is appropriate after a passenger who was not wearing a life jacket drowned. Tayron Jones of Waitara pleaded guilty to the charge after Urkadzu died when Jones's boat capsized on the Waitara Bar in July 2015. Appearing for sentence in the High Court in New Plymouth today, Jones was convicted and discharged and ordered to pay $5,000 in reparations. Justice Williams says Mr Zhu had died on the defendant's watch.
You are responsible for putting both him and you, in a situation where even the slightest mistake would have the most serious consequences.
Justice Williams, it's the first time a manslaughter charge has been laid against a recreational boatie. About 100 tonnes of rock and debris have fallen this afternoon at a slip in Ngaio Gorge in Wellington. The slip, which has closed the road since the weekend, is still growing despite efforts by engineers to sluice away loose material on the hillside. The City Council says high-tech monitors at the site meant crews had more than 10 minutes warning to get out of the way. A Canterbury wine company is being accused of using false information on its labels. Southern Boundary Wines Limited and 3 of its directors and winemakers face more than 150 charges. It's the first prosecution under the Wine Act and follows an investigation by the Ministry for Primary Industries. The ministry says the company made false statements about the vintage of some of its wine and where it was produced. It's 5:04. To sport, and the former New Zealand cricketer Dion Nash says the late Sir John Graham took a group of renegade no-hopers and made them into a team. Sir John, or DJ as he was called by many, died last night after a long illness, aged 82. As well as being a former All Black captain, headmaster of Auckland Grammar School, president of the New Zealand Rugby Union, he also managed the Black Caps in the late 90s. Nash says Sir John was understanding and patient in his approach.
DJ had that special thing to make everybody he came across feel that they were the special one. He made each and every one of us feel like we were his special sort of project, and I think he made many people feel that way. So that's a huge skill, but I think it also just sort of speaks volumes about how many people he helped.
Dion Nash. The All Whites coach Anthony Hudson is banking on the return of skipper Winston Reid to boost his side's performance for the upcoming World Cup qualifiers. The West Ham defender is set to play for the All Whites for the first time in almost a year after being named in the squad for the two-leg qualifier against the Solomon Islands next month. Lydia Ko will try to get her season back on track when she tees off in the British Women's Golf Open in Scotland tonight. The two-time major champion hasn't won a tournament in the past year, and after missing the cut in last weekend's Scottish Open, has fallen to 5th in the world rankings. That's the news.
National warms up for a fight.
I think where it could be helpful to us is for some of our supporters to understand that there's a very big, there's a scrap on.
The Māori Party offers an olive branch.
And if our people say to us, as they have on the hustings this year, work with Labour. We will work with Labour.
The Opportunities Party offers to quit. You're prepared to say this morning, live on national radio, that if they adopt these policies, you will fold the tent on top.
If they adopted all of them, absolutely.
Morning Report with Susie Ferguson and Guy and Espina, weekdays from 6.
Then on 9 to noon, DNA deciphering and unearthing family histories with genealogist Michelle Patient. And after 10, the history and mystery of the labyrinth with one of the world's leading maze designers, Adrian Fisher. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Met service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland, scattered rain, clearing overnight and becoming fine. Auckland to Kapiti, including Coromandel Peninsula, Bay of Plenty, Taupo, Taumaranui and Taihape. Mainly fine, however, a few showers in the east of Taihape and Manawatu from tomorrow afternoon. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, a few showers becoming more frequent tomorrow afternoon. Wellington, a few showers gradually clearing tomorrow. For the entire South Island, mainly fine, apart from isolated showers about coastal Marlborough and Canterbury. And for the Chatham Islands, occasional showers. It's 5:05 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you very much, Katrina. Coming up on the program tonight, and thank you for being with us. The Auditor General has resigned. Our gallery explains why. He was a former All Black and many other things, but Sir John Graham's life as an educationalist is being celebrated today after his death last night, and a week on from the sudden closure of Thames engineering firm A&G Price. Staff are yet to receive redundancy or even their final pay. But we begin tonight with a quote. Crisis of patient care is the phrase. It's in the urology department at Dunedin Hospital. That description came from Dr. Stephen Mark, the head of the Urological Society of New Zealand, who last night listened to Checkpoint's coverage on what was happening at the hospital and today called the DHB to offer his help. As revealed last night on this program, frustration with long waiting times for treatment saw the DHB commission an independent review into its own urology department. This follows our stories last week identifying a shortage of ICU beds for post-operative care as being responsible for delays and cancellations to operations, including for patients with heart conditions. Now, at the time, the hospital CEO told us there weren't enough ICU beds, but said the number is being increased. Last night, he told us a review of urology will help the DHB get that department working more effectively. But surgeons and external medical experts say it's not before time. So too do the patients themselves, like this Dunedin man.
Urinary tract completely cut off.
This is Dave McLean. In 2015, he was suddenly hit by the most incredible pain. And what was the cause of that? Did you have an enlarged prostate?
Enlarged prostate, yeah.
So the prostate was so enlarged that it was actually blocking your urinary tract?
Yeah, blocked it. I got a major prostate infection on top of the enlargement that was there. And the combined effect caused urinary tract to cut off completely.
The pain, he says, was in a different league from anything he'd ever experienced before by a considerable margin.
And it was extreme burning. Yeah, it was as if the penis was immersed in boiling water.
A catheter was inserted, then taken out. The pain returned. The catheter was reinserted, and this time it stayed in until Dave had surgery, thanks to his employer having staff health insurance.
And the price of the surgery without Southern Cross cover is around about $10,000.
Wait a sec, the price of the surgery, why didn't you have this in the public system?
Yeah, we would have to ask the public system. It would seem, when I asked my GP, if it was normal to go so long with a catheter before deciding, he said that, well, in his opinion, it would not be normal. But that's just the way the public hospital system was.
How long did you have a catheter in for?
5 months.
5 months. And when the surgery was finally done in a private hospital, Mercy, who was the surgeon?
KP Somalia.
Who was also a urologist at Dunedin Hospital. Are people waiting too long?
Yes, I think so. Some people are waiting too long, yes.
This is Dr. Kamta Somalia, one of 3 urologists at Dunedin Hospital, but between them, they only work 2 FTEs, full-time equivalent jobs.
So if all 3 of us at Dunedin Hospital were full-timers, working full-time, we probably will just make it.
But in fact, 3 of you are doing 2 full-time equivalent jobs.
Exactly, absolutely.
Which means you are not getting enough hours to keep up with demand.
Absolutely, I agree with you, yeah.
Checkpoint has been repeatedly told, both on the record and off it, that there simply aren't enough surgery hours available in the urology department at Dunedin Hospital. And what does that mean in terms of delays to treatment?
Obviously, when the work coming in and the number of people going on the waiting list are far much more than what we can service with 2 FTE.
2 full-time equivalents?
Yes.
Dunedin Hospital has 2, Nelson Hospital and Palmerston North Hospital have 4. Everyone we've spoken to has told us 2 is nowhere near enough.
And we just are not getting the resources we need. We do not have the full-time equivalents we need.
That's Dr. Alistair Hepburn, another of the specialist urologists at Dunedin Hospital. Are you saying as a result of only having 2 full-time equivalent staff, people with cancer are having to wait longer for treatment than is appropriate?
At the present time, that is one of the major problems, yes. It's not the only problem, but it is one of the major problems.
People with prostate cancer?
Correct, yes.
Other forms of cancer?
Definitely, yes.
Last night on Checkpoint, the Southern DHB CEO, Chris Fleming, told us a review was being conducted into the urology department at Dunedin Hospital. But what we didn't know then was whose idea it was. I asked Dr. Alistair Hepburn, who suggested that review?
It was a suggestion from myself and my colleague.
In short, the surgeons themselves were so frustrated by their situation, they asked for the review.
So that was something that we demanded, we asked for, and pleasingly it has happened, but not without a lot of pressure.
The review's due back within the next week or 2. The urologists are grateful the DHB agreed to it, but what they really want is some more staff. This is a difficult question for you to answer, and sure. You are in a master-servant relationship with the Southern DHB, even though you are a senior urologist. But do you feel like there are real financial pressures driving what appear on the face of it to be insufficient staff numbers?
I can say that's the feeling I get, yes.
Last night, Stephen Mark listened to our interviews from Checkpoint. He's a urologist and chairman of the Urological Society. So concerned was he by what he heard on our program, he phoned the CEO of the DHB.
And I've certainly spoken to Chris Fleming today, and I've agreed to be directly involved with trying to improve that care by being involved in the implementation of any change.
So change appears to be coming, but it's taken a long time. And in the meantime, Stephen Mark, what do you think it's like now in the urology department at Dunedin Hospital?
Look, I think there is a a crisis of patient care because they've got concerns about the inability to deliver the care in the time frames that they wish to do so.
A crisis of patient care. That's the chairman of the Urological Society of New Zealand talking about a public hospital. The DHB denies this, but outside the most senior levels of hospital management, every single person we've spoken to, including the urologists themselves, says it's principally a question of resourcing. You can't do surgery without surgeons, and in full-time equivalent terms, Dunedin Hospital has 2.
And that's really quite inadequate.
Stephen Mark, or as Dr. Alistair Hepburn put it,
yes, if we got more funding, our service would be in a much better situation.
And people wouldn't have to wait as long?
Absolutely.
It's one of the urologists at Dunedin Hospital. The Health Minister, Jonathan Coleman, was unavailable once again to be interviewed tonight. The Prime Minister, Bill English, was in Dunedin today. He told our reporter Ian Telfer that if the DHB can't meet its target times for operations, it should be making arrangements for the surgery to take place elsewhere.
There are requirements about when the service should be available, and I would hope that anyone who's diagnosed with a significant illness in that way gets the service they deserve, and if there's a problem in this individual case, then it needs to be taken up with the GP or the hospital.
But the DHB has now admitted there are 10 cases like him of people waiting more than 5 months. What's going on there?
Well, you need to ask the DHB. I mean, they're responsible for providing services. They've got some targets they are meant to adhere to, which represent good service for the public. And I would hope that if those 10 cases aren't getting the service here, then the DHB make sure they get it somewhere else.
Before that, we had thousands of eye appointments that were delayed. We've also had, they've admitted themselves, too few ICU beds. Aren't we getting to a point where we have a crisis at Dunedin Hospital?
I haven't seen evidence that there's a crisis. They are going to be, in the position where they're dealing with unsatisfactory facilities there, at the same time as there's a lot of work going on about how much to invest in the facilities now, knowing that there's going to be a rebuild in the near future, and those are decisions that the management there will need to make.
Do you have faith in your minister, your health minister? Because he won't talk to us. He hasn't talked to us for a week on this.
Oh yes, I do have faith in him. I mean, the running the public health system is a very large, complex task. But I also have faith in the professionals and the management who run the frontline services, because every day hundreds of thousands of New Zealanders are getting very good service. Where they aren't, of course, people should be moving to remedy that.
After 6 o'clock tonight, we'll hear from the acting head of Dunedin's emergency department, who says it's unthinkable the Southern DHB is paying surgeons to do nothing. Well, you just heard from Bill English. We won't be hearing once again from Jonathan Coleman, but we are being joined now by the Southern DHB Commissioner, Kathy Grant, who has been listening to all of that on the phone. Kathy Grant, thank you so much for joining us. You were a ministerial appointment back in August 2015 after the Health Minister sacked the DHB board. That's right, isn't it?
Yes, that is correct, John.
Right. What do you say to Bill English's recommendation that you need to make arrangements for those patients to get surgery as soon as possible?
I think that I would prefer to take that conversation one step back, John. And as you are aware from your telephone discussion last evening on Checkpoint with the Chief Executive, the review that has been the subject of much comment has been initiated. It will be with us next week, as I understand it, and I will be looking to the Chief Executive to bring to me plans for implementation in order that we can plan pathways forward for patients.
Right. In terms of the patients themselves, who probably aren't interested in pathways and more interested in surgery, what is it you recommend they do?
I am not in a position to comment on individual cases. I would, of course, I'm most concerned about our patients. The delays that have been described are indeed very regrettable. We need to identify the actions that can be taken and to address the issues that
the actions that can be taken surely are for the hospital to do what a hospital exists to do, and that's operate.
That is correct.
I'm just a bit confused about all of this. You are now pinning your hopes on a review that the hospital really had to be forced by their own surgeons into undertaking. You have 2 full-time equivalent...
If I may correct that statement, the preparation of and the undertaking of the report was as much initiated by the DHB as by the urologist.
Okay.
It was in both of our interests to understand what the issues were in the delivery of that particular service.
Aren't the issues really simple? And there are some discussions around inefficiencies, but the issues are simply that you have 2 full-time equivalent urologists, right? Nelson has 4. Palmerston North has 4. Why does Dunedin have 2?
Well, that is a clinical issue that, as Commissioner, I am not in a...
It's not a clinical issue, is it? It's a financial issue.
Well, I'm not... you would need to have a conversation, or you would. It would be more helpful if you were to have a conversation in relation to that matter with our Chief Medical Officer. But
we've spoken to your Chief Medical Officer. Look, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but we keep talking to people who shimmy around the buck. We've spoken to your Chief Medical Officer, who admitted that things in some respects, particularly around ICU bed numbers, aren't as he would have them. We've spoken to your CEO, who is very forthcoming and comes on when we ask him, and he has said he is not satisfied with waiting times, and he is not satisfied with what's going on in the urology department, and he is not satisfied with ICU bed numbers. We keep hearing this. Now, I look at your appointment by the Minister in June 2015. You were appointed to address a deficit. You were given financial KPIs. In July 2015, your employers asked to pay you more money because of the very unpopular decisions you might have to pay. And people keep telling me they don't have enough money to do what they need to do. Now, the buck for that stops with you, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And I have articulated that our challenge is to make the Southern District Health Board sustainable and reposition it in such a way as it is sustainable.
Financially sustainable? What about financially?
If I might finish,
surely.
Sustainability is a measure across, in my view, 4 dimensions: financial, clinical, quality, and our workforce. If we focus only on any one of those, we will have failed. It would have been when the Commissioner team was appointed in June 2015. The deficit could have been eliminated by a slash and burn exercise. That was not a pathway that we chose. It's a question of repositioning Southern in such a way as to be a sustainable organisation. So the driver is not simply a financial one.
If we look at some of the targets that the ministry has, for example, after formal diagnosis of cancer, meaningful treatment within 31 days, the longest kind of calendar month. If Paul Schofield has now been waiting for over 4 months and has absolutely no idea still when his cancer is going to be treated, is that satisfactory, do you think?
No, it isn't. It isn't satisfactory. The comment that I would make is that Southern has suffered from really years of underinvestment and significant deficits. So the pathway forward is going to take a period of time. There is no
which is look, absolutely, which is all very well and good when we're talking about financial KPIs and deficits and budgets and bringing things in under what the government requires of you. But if you have prostate cancer and you are waiting for treatment and you don't know when it's coming, do you think that you want to even hear those discussions taking place?
Probably not. I acknowledge that the delays are regrettable, that the patient groups that you have been talking to do need their surgery. We are making progress. We are investing in the future of Southern DHB and initiating change.
That is Cathy Grant, who is the Southern DHB Commissioner. We really appreciate you joining us this evening, Cathy Grant. So we have had the hat-trick from the South. We have had the Commissioner, we have had the CEO, and we have had the Chief Medical Officer, All that is left is the Minister, Jonathan Coleman, who consistently says no to our invitations to him appearing on Checkpoint. This does increasingly look like a financial consideration. The buck for that surely stops with the Minister, and we do invite him once again to join us whenever he can. The country's top public watchdog has fallen on his sword. The Auditor General, Martin Matthews, resigned over his handling of a major fraud case when he led the Transport Ministry. His conduct's been under investigation for the past 2 months, but the findings of that inquiry will now stay secret. Here's our political reporter, Craig McCulloch.
It's a scandal that's been hitting the headlines for months. Revelation after revelation of the audacious fraud that went on at the Transport Ministry while Martin Matthews was the CEO. Joanne Harrison, now in prison, stole nearly $750,000 over several years, despite staff repeatedly raising concerns about the manager. Indeed, when whistleblowers did speak up, Harrison was allowed to hit back, forcing them out in an early restructure. For months, Mr Matthews has stood by his actions. He acted appropriately, he said, suggesting anyone could have been duped. But today he changed his tune, publicly announcing his resignation in a statement.
I accept I am accountable for everything done in and by the ministry when I was CEO, and I am ultimately responsible. I deeply regret and am sorry that I did not detect earlier her fraudulent actions. I feel as angry and aggrieved as anyone about her stealing and breaches of trust. She gave me explanations that I accepted. It turns out I was wrong. I should have been more suspicious.
It's untenable, Martin Matthews says, for him to stay on because the public must be able to have complete confidence in the Auditor General. It's something Labour's Sue Moroney's been saying right from the beginning.
It's been a long time coming, and I've always felt that there were far too many questions unanswered about how Martin Matthews dealt with a fraud that happened right under his nose.
Mr Matthews was appointed to the role by a cross-party group of MPs last year, but New Zealand First Leader Winston Peters says he should never have got the job.
In my view, this appointment was unsound because they didn't have and hadn't acquired all the information to make a sound judgment. Now, that's the situation, and you'll get a whole lot of establishment figures who will rush out to say this is all fine and dandy when it's not.
Mr Matthews has been on leave for more than 2 months while an inquiry's been carried out into his role, led by retired public servant Sir Martin Weavers. It was supposed to be done and dusted in 2 weeks, but instead it dragged on. And while it's complete now, it may never see the light of day. The parliamentary committee which ordered the review won't release it, saying the matter's now closed. Winston Peters isn't impressed.
You cannot have an inquiry that goes to that level at some significant expense into such a high office and then keep the findings confidential and secret from the taxpayer.
United Future leader Peter Dunn says the report's a full and devastating critique, making it untenable for Mr Matthews to stay on.
It would have been very difficult, I think, for him to have survived that, and I think it's the right thing to do to tender his resignation now and prevent Parliament having to pass a resolution of no confidence in him.
The Speaker of the House, David Carter, says 5 major parties, including New Zealand First, agreed for the report to stay confidential. And he dismissed criticism of Mr Matthews' appointment.
All 5 major parties are represented. They all have the opportunity to be involved in the employment process. They made the decision at the time. A considerable amount of information has come out subsequent to that appointment, and it has now cost Mr Matthews his job.
The government says Mr Matthews' departure brings the sorry saga to an end, but with questions still about his appointment and conduct, the issue is unlikely to go away. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Craig McCulloch.
28 minutes past 5. A week on from the sudden closure of Thames engineering firm A&G Price, staff say they're yet to receive their final pay or any redundancy. 100 staff were given just minutes to pack their belongings and get out last week, on the same day the company was due to celebrate 150 years in business. Staff say they should have known something was up when the CEO and foundry manager left the week before. They were all laid off. Laura Tupor and our cameraman Bradley White travelled to Thames to see what the future holds.
A recruitment drive at a pub in Thames today after one of the town's biggest employers shut up shop without warning last Wednesday.
We should have known something was up when the CEO retired and our foundry manager left all in the same week. They got their payouts. And a week later, doors were shut and we got nothing.
Shane Egan worked at engineering firm A&G Price as a furnishman for 6 years. He and around 100 others lost their jobs a week ago when the company announced it was in liquidation. Jeff Bergeson has been associated with the company for more than 40 years, including 16 years as foundry manager. His father, son and 2 brothers also worked there.
I'm getting a lot older now, so obviously retirement's on the horizon, but I've got to do something between now and then.
Can I ask how old you are?
I was 62 years of age on the day that they closed the foundry. And A&G Price would have been 150 years old as a company on that very day, virtually.
Today, the Waikato Engineers Careers Association organised for employers to come to Thames to talk to the staff about job opportunities as far away as Hamilton. On the tables were job descriptions for the roles available. Roger Evans from Stafford Engineering was one of those who came along.
I mean, we're looking for 2 people for our business, and we've got to start a staff of 60. And if we can find the right guys, we'll hire them tomorrow. But there's a guy that came to see me just a few minutes ago. I was speaking to him. He's an adult apprentice, and we've got opening for apprentices. I hadn't considered to come here looking for an apprentice, but we've got opportunities, so we're definitely going to have a talk to Paul.
Shane Egan is now looking for work as a labourer. He says he's been to Winds every day since he was laid off.
The longest thing has been trying to get the appointment to sit down with them and go through it. We just never heard anything. And finally yesterday I got told that my appointment's going to be tomorrow at 9 o'clock. So one of the other blokes got their one yesterday and he's entitled to $43, I believe, because his partner works a minimum wage job. She gets 40 hours a week at minimum wage, and that's all that they're going to get, plus his $40.
Mr Egan says staff have yet to receive their final pay or any redundancy. He believes he's owed around $8,000 or $9,000, but many others are owed much more.
Creature comforts are all gone, that's for sure. It's just a matter of keeping the head above water at the moment, but we will find something. It'll all happen. We just really would like some answers from the company as to what's happening and when. We haven't heard a thing since that Wednesday we got told to go home. We haven't heard from them.
Ludwig von Maltitz came from South Africa 10 years ago to take up a job at A&G Price.
I was the senior metallurgist, so I was looking at the foundry side of it, looking at the metals, the chemical analysis, the properties being tested, the hardness, the heat treatment side of it, to a large extent the welding, the non-destructive testing, getting the castings up to standard, and getting the castings processed through the foundry as well.
Mr von Maltitz and his wife purchased a house in Thames and have a mortgage. He says he's been looking for work but has been asked by the receivers to return as a contractor for a few weeks to finish some castings which would be able to be sold to bring in some more cash to pay creditors. Have you seen any jobs here today look good?
I've seen 2 and it's fairly promising. So at the moment it's looking good.
But you have to go to Hamilton, right?
Yep, I'll have to relocate, whether it's Hamilton or Tauranga or Auckland.
Shane Egan is hopeful he too will soon have a job, but says he'll miss the camaraderie of his mates at A&G Price.
We had a ball at work. We were always laughing and joking, and a great bunch of guys to work with. That's not going to get replaced, unfortunately. Maybe, I don't know. But it'll be hard pressed to beat the environment that we had together to work with. It was really, really neat.
A&G Price did not return calls. Mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi ko Laura Tupou aho.
And in a statement, the receivers Ecovis KGA told us unpaid wages will be paid this week. We will keep an eye on that. Liquidator Gareth Hole says holiday pay and redundancy entitlements will be addressed as and when cash becomes available. He says he is mindful of the financial pressures on the former employees, and those payments will be made as soon as they possibly can. Coming up on Checkpoint, a Taranaki skipper is convicted of manslaughter following the death of a passenger who was not wearing a life jacket. Christchurch City Council becomes the third local body in the country to adopt a living wage for employees, and tributes paid to former All Black and Auckland Grammar principal Sir John Graham. We would love to hear your feedback, particularly around the Southern DHB stories we have been doing over the past week or so. You can text us 2101, you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. We're on Facebook, Checkpoint with John Campbell, or email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. Nona next with business, but first Katrina with the headlines.
The United Future leader says it was untenable for Martin Matthews to stay on as Auditor General given the outcome of an investigation into his handling of a major fraud case when he led the Transport Ministry. The parliamentary committee that appointed Mr Matthews as Auditor General ordered the investigation but is refusing to release its findings publicly. However, Mr Matthews has now resigned. Peter Dunn says the contents of the report left him no choice. The Prime Minister, Bill English, says he expects the Southern DHB to transfer cancer patients elsewhere if it cannot treat them itself. Checkpoint has revealed 10 Dunedin Hospital patients with prostate cancer have waited for up to 7 months for urgent surgery meant to be done within a month. The chair of the Urological Society, Stephen Mark, describes the situation as a crisis of patient care. Meanwhile, Bill English has confirmed the rebuild of Dunedin Hospital could cost $700,000 to $1 billion. Labour's health spokesperson David Clark revealed the blowout 2 months ago, but the government would not confirm it then. In Auckland, patients are having cancer treatment delayed as County's Manukau District Health Board fell short of the target for timely treatment. The government set target requires 85% of people who have a high suspicion of cancer to have their first treatment within 2 months, but the latest Health Ministry figures for the 3 months to March show the DHB reached 75%. The police are treating the death of a man found beside a South Canterbury river as suspicious, saying he had several injuries. The 45-year-old's body was found on Tuesday evening on the banks of the Opihi River near Fairlie. And a slip blocking Wellington's Ngaio Gorge Road is continuing to grow, with another 100 tonnes of rock and debris falling today. Those are the headlines. I'll be back at 6.
Thank you so much. It was about 25 and a half minutes away. Nona Peltze on the other side of me. Hi, Nona.
Hey, good afternoon.
Good afternoon to you. Two of New Zealand's listed retailers are hoping the cold weather will improve winter sales.
That's right. So there was a late start to winter. It seems such a long time ago. Who remembers that, right?
Well, it made up for lost time once it started.
We certainly have. So this cold weather is great for retailers, who benefit from, people buying winter goods, right? Makes sense. You buy your winter goods in the winter. We had a late start, so that did have some impact on sales. In New Zealand, we talked to a couple of listed retailers today, Briscoe and Kathmandu. So Kathmandu did pretty well because Australia had, probably more seasonable weather than we were finding in New Zealand. So overall, their sales rose for the full year. Also, Briscoe Group did pretty well. But I spoke with Rod Duke, and he thought that not all retailers were going to be doing so well because not only were they hit by the warmer than expected weather, but those rugby tourists, yes, the Lions tour, impacted retail sales for some goods and services.
In what way?
Well, instead of spending your money on some homewares, I don't know, did you go shopping for homewares, John and Jim?
Well, the Lions were here.
Yeah.
No.
No.
I'm not a big homeware shopper, as a general rule of thumb.
Probably not, but a lot of people who might have gone and bought some things for their home were spending their money in the bar and restaurants and on rugby tickets.
Like really expensive rugby tickets.
Yeah, so that money came out of the pocket of people who are spending, say, on sporting goods, outdoor clothing, and homewares, and so that probably other retailers also felt that. So we may see that come through. Well, it remains to be seen.
Well, Rod Duke is a savvy reader of the market, isn't he?
He is. He's quite a clever fella.
Yeah.
So their sales rose, 4% in the first half, and with 10% rise in profit for Kathmandu over the year. So pretty good results for those guys. Now, how did that shake down in the market, you might ask?
I'm going to ask it.
Yes, there you go. Briscoe Group share price rose 3 cents to $4.09, and Kathmandu's rose 2 cents to $2.28. And you know, that helped bring the market to another record high. Yes, indeed. We rose up 5 points, only just a little bit, to a record 7,754.
It wasn't long ago you were sitting in the studio saying we're heading towards 7,000, right?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, okay.
But we keep going higher. And of course, the New Zealand dollar is somewhat steady, a little bit weaker, but the US dollar is wobbling, so we're holding on at 74 US cents, 93.3 Australian, and 56 pence.
Nona Peltier, thank you very much indeed. It's coming up to 20-6. You are with Checkpoint on RNZ. In a landmark case, a Taranaki skipper has been convicted of manslaughter following the death of a passenger on his boat who was not wearing a life jacket. Urkazu drowned when his fishing buddy Tyrone Jones, 4-metre inflatable, capsized as it attempted to cross the Waitara Bar in 2015. Now, Jones pleaded guilty to Mr Zoo's manslaughter in February. Our Taranaki reporter Robin Martin was at the High Court in New Plymouth, and Robin filed this report.
On July the 30th, 2015, Tyrone Jones and Erica Zoo set off for a fishing trip on a relatively benign midwinter's morning. But after deciding to return early, Jones chose a poor time to cross the Waitara Bar, and the boat capsized, throwing both men into the water. A surfer rescued Jones, but his 52-year-old friend was drowned. Neither man was wearing a life jacket, breaching maritime rules which require them to be available and worn when crossing a bar. The Crown argued Jones had failed to take all necessary safety precautions required by law by not having life jackets on board. Justice Williams told the court the case was unusual because it was the first time a manslaughter prosecution had been brought for a breach of maritime rules. Jones's defence lawyer, Ron Mansfield, had sought a discharge without conviction, but Justice Williams said a conviction was appropriate.
Mr Zoo drowned on your watch. You put him in harm's way by crossing that bar at a problematic time without the necessary safety equipment. You are responsible for putting both him and you, in a situation where even the slightest mistake would have the most serious consequences. I consider that public acknowledgement of those facts through the entry of a conviction is a proportionate response to that reality.
Justice Williams acknowledged Jones had a pre-existing head injury which affected his decision-making and made him prone to panic. He also praised his actions as the drama unfolded.
You immediately moved to help Mr Zoo. You carried the only flotation device available on the craft to him, and you ensured that he was as safe as he could be before you returned to the inevitably hopeless task of pursuing the boat. In short, you did what you could in the circumstances.
Earlier, Mr Zoo's widow's impact statement was read out, in which Hu Jing Ho relived the moment when she found out her husband was dead.
I heard Jenny scream over the phone. Jenny told me car is gone. I could not believe it, even after a policeman, led me to see Carl's body. He was alive when he partied in the morning. In shock, my head gone empty.
Ms Ho said although she and her daughter felt the pain of her husband's loss every day, she had forgiven Jones.
Tyrone is lucky to be alive, and I do not want him to be tortured by what happened to my deceased husband.
At the conclusion of the sentencing, Justice Williams allowed Jones, a retired music teacher, to make a statement of his own.
I've lost my friend, and I grieve every day. I grieve every day, and every time I look upon the water, I remember. And the first thing I do in the morning when I wake up is I remember. I accept full responsibility for what happened, and I have the deepest regret that words cannot explain.
Jones was convicted and discharged and ordered to pay $5,000 in reparations. In a statement, Maritime New Zealand says the conviction sends a strong and tragic reminder to recreational boaties to follow the basic safety practices, in particular wearing life jackets. For Checkpoint, ko Robin Martin tēnei.
Sir John Graham was a former All Black captain, which counts for something in this country, obviously, but first and foremost, and he would have told you this, he was an educator. He died last night in Auckland after a lengthy illness. He was 82. Born David John Graham, he went by David or DJ and played 22 tests for the All Blacks between 1958 and 1964, including 3 as captain. Headmaster of Auckland Grammar from 1973 to 1993. Former president of the New Zealand Rugby Union. He also managed the New Zealand cricket team, the Black Caps, in the late 90s. It was a remarkable life, and Joanna Mackenzie looks back on it.
And the second half has barely begun when they make their strongest attack yet. Dave Graham makes ground, passes to Colin Meads, and
for many people, it'll be his exploits on the rugby field that DJ Graham will be remembered for. But he was a man with many other strings to his bow, who's been described as compassionate and inspirational, leaving behind a legacy of service to others. He was born in Stratford in Taranaki in 1935 and attended New Plymouth Boys High School before heading to Auckland University, where he completed a master's degree in history. During his university days, he made the Auckland rugby team before moving to Christchurch and playing for Canterbury between 1958 and 1965, making his Test debut in 1958 at loose forward. He was also outspoken against apartheid, recalling his 1960 trip to South Africa in this interview with RNZ in 2011.
I was appalled by the treatment of 90% of the South African population. I visited Sharpeville and Cato Manor, and that just confirmed to me that what was being done there was unacceptable.
But it was his 2-decade-long stint as principal of Auckland Grammar where he achieved his biggest impact, guiding the lives of tens of thousands of young men. The chief executive of New Zealand Rugby, Steve Chew, says Sir John Graham was an educator first and foremost.
He was just a great all-rounder, his contribution to education. I remember he once said to me, other than love, the most important thing you give your kids is an education, and I guess that's probably what he will want to be remembered most for.
Sir Brian Lahore came into the All Black side when Sir John Graham was skipper. Lahore says after a difficult start to his first tour, Sir John was instrumental in settling his nerves.
I talked to him about that, and he assured me that life was like that, and that I'd been doing okay. And a week after our discussion, which was late one night, I was playing a test match. So, there was some synergies because of that.
And as a mentor, he was second to none for former All Blacks coach Sir Graham Henry. He says Sir John's thinking about leadership was ahead of its time, with a focus on developing people rather than telling them what to do. Henry says whenever he had a problem, he could rely on Sir John to set him straight.
When you're coaching the All Blacks, for example, there's challenges. It's a pretty loaded job at times. And it's just great to be able to talk to guys like John Graham about the challenges of that job. And that lessens the load. You walk out of there feeling $1 million and light on your feet, because you've discussed it all, come to some conclusion that you might have been struggling with.
Former cricketer Dion Nash was an Auckland Grammar pupil under Sir John and also a black cap while he was the team's manager. During that time, Sir John had dealt with a famously difficult group of players and managed to get the best out of them.
We were considered by much in the media and many of the, many within this cricket fraternity as a bunch of sort of renegade no-hopers, really. He walked into that and rather than come in a hostile way, I think he came in with a lot of understanding. More than anything, we respected the way he approached it, but also we didn't want to let him down in the end. He showed so much faith in us and in our potential.
Sir John Graham was made a Commander of the Order of the British Empire for services to education in 1994, and in 2011 he was appointed a Knight Companion of the New Zealand Order of Merit. He had an absolute belief in the power of education, and in 2012 received the Sir Peter Blake Award for Leadership, telling TVNZ what he thought went into being a good leader.
A leader has to have a fantastic number of people who support, and I owe any accolades that I've received because of the quality of New Zealanders that I've been surrounded by. Very few leaders think they'll be leaders. Certainly most good ones don't.
Auckland Grammar School's flag is flying at half-mast today as a mark of respect for Sir John Graham's influence on the school and a life well lived. For Checkpoint, called Joanna Mackenzie Ho.
12 minutes to 6 on Checkpoint. The Christchurch City Council has become the third local body in the country to adopt the living wage for employees. The $20.20 an hour will benefit 470 of its staff and cost $750,000 more each year. That's over and above current salary budgets. Here's our Christchurch local government reporter, Conan Young.
The
The pay rise for the council's lowest paid workers was passed today with just 2 councillors voting against it. Looking on were union representatives and a member of the steering committee for the Living Wage campaign, Karina Brown.
I think that it's great that we're leading in this, because we need to lead in this, because the City Council leads in the other big organisations in Christchurch can do it as well, because we shouldn't be racing to the bottom for the wages.
Ahead of the vote, Councillor Aaron Kewen made an impassioned plea for his colleagues to do the right thing.
Lay your cards on the table here, because this is your chance to look working class people in the eye and say, we value you. You are parents, you are children, you are brothers and sisters. We value you. We value the toilets you clean, the trenches you dig and the walls you paint. You're an important part of our society. Oh, and the lives you save at the pool and the ocean.
Mayor Leanne Dalzell, a former Labour MP, pointed to decisions by National's Ruth Richardson in the early 90s as being to blame for the fact a living wage campaign was even needed.
So we're being asked to solve a problem that was created out of a deliberate attempt to destroy collective bargaining at the same time as reducing benefits. That meant that there was a bottom line where the minimum wage couldn't fall, it got dropped. And the minimum wage was not increased for 9 years.
But Jamie Goff, who was one of 2 councillors to vote against the living wage, warned of a snowball effect, saying private sector workers would expect a similar sudden pay rise.
That all of a sudden you've got someone that came in yesterday, a teenager that was paid $17 an hour, and there's a team leader or something in the same sector that's paid $21. Now, all of a sudden, if that teenager that came in and was employed yesterday is then paid $20.20, I can tell you there's going to be an impact on the person that's paid $21 that's their team leader.
It's not just staff employed directly by the council, such as lifeguards, that could benefit from the pay rise. Councillors also asked for a report on the cost of extending the living wage to contractors and staff working for council-controlled organisations, such as the airport, representing thousands of workers across the city. In Ototahi for Checkpoint, ko Conan Young Tēnei.
9 minutes to 6. There is new hope for thousands of families who live with the prospect of passing on inherited diseases to future generations. For the first time, scientists in the US, along with experts from China and South Korea, have successfully repaired a faulty gene in human embryos. Critics are warning that the technique could ultimately be used to create so-called designer babies. The BBC's medical correspondent, Fergus Walsh, has been looking at this.
The goal could not be more ambitious: to eradicate inherited diseases. The scientists have taken an impressive first step on a long road, editing DNA in human embryos. Inside the nucleus of each of our cells is our genome, billions of pieces of DNA. It's the instruction manual for life. The scientists were targeting a faulty gene that causes a serious heart condition. They fertilised a healthy egg with sperm from a man carrying the faulty gene. They then injected the gene editing system known as CRISPR. This scans the DNA like a spell check or a sat-nav. It then cuts both strands of the DNA and removes the faulty gene. A healthy copy of the gene from the egg was then naturally inserted. 42 of 58 embryos were corrected. They were allowed to develop for 5 days. None was implanted.
We're very excited about all the work, of course.
The research has been welcomed by a team in London who have a licence to edit human embryos. They say the technology could eventually help many families.
There are some nasty genetic diseases, such as Huntington's, or as in this case, a disease that affects heart function later in life, which can basically blight families for many generations. So a method of being able to avoid having affected children, passing on the defective gene, could be really very important for those families.
Nicole Mowbray has the same heart condition which was corrected in human embryos. She now has a defibrillator implanted in her chest in case her heart stops. She has a 50% risk of passing on the condition, but is unsure whether she'd ever consider gene editing.
I wouldn't want to pass on something that caused my child to have a limited life or a painful life or a life of risk. I mean, that does obviously come to the front of my mind when I think about having children. I wouldn't want to create the perfect, in inverted commas, child, I feel like my condition makes me me.
Previous attempts at editing human embryos in China led to serious errors in the DNA, so there's a lot of work needed before this could be considered safe, and it raises ethical issues about how far science should go to create healthy babies.
That was Fergus Walsh from the BBC. Sometimes we do stories on Checkpoint that generate so much feedback it's a bit of an avalanche. And tonight our coverage of the Southern DHB is a very arresting example of that. I've never heard so much buck passing. Please don't give up, John. How is this not a financial issue? The government needs to invest money, and now it doesn't need a raft of consultants to discern this. Good evening. So the government can spend $26 million on a flag referendum and help out Team New Zealand, but cannot find money to fund life-saving operations. Thanks, says Stephen. Southern DHB, Jonathan Coleman, he's always happy to bask in the glory of our sports people, All Blacks, Team NZ, etc. But when it comes to difficult health stuff, he runs for cover. He's a disgrace, and I hope he gets voted out or shamed into leaving. But there are too many fun perks being Sports Minister for him to do that. That's Robin from Auckland. As a Dunedin National Party supporter, and remember we're talking about the Southern DHB here, Health Minister Jonathan Coleman needs to be sacked. He's been impotent to the point of being totally useless at fixing the issues here. More jargon than you can poke a scalpel at from the Commissioner. We were talking to the government-appointed Commissioner, Cathy Grant, and that's what a lot of you are reacting to, although full credit to her for fronting, unlike the Minister. John, congratulations to you and your team for persisting with the Southern DHB issue. It seems history is repeating itself. Do you remember our patients are dying in Christchurch in the 1990s? Minister Coleman is so conspicuous by his absence. The Southern DHB Commissioner's pathway should be straight out the door. She is a clueless bureaucrat. All this talk about doing reviews and waiting for reports, forward planning, etc. Bill English passing the buck. People are dying, and all of this because they want to save money. Grrr. Thank you for your feedback. We really do appreciate it. And Minister, if you are listening somewhere, you are so welcome to respond to that feedback and that criticism of your absence by calling us and coming on live. The US President Donald Trump has opened up another fight with Congress, this time over his latest immigration plan. Under the planned legislation, the number of immigrants allowed into the US would be halved, and the policy would prioritise job skills over family connections. And its unveiling led to some heated exchanges in the White House press briefing room. With more, here's the ABC's Ann Barker.
It's called the RAISE Act, R-A-I-S-E, but racist is the word some are using for a bill that's partly based on Australia's skilled migration plan. RAISE stands for Reforming American Immigration for Strong Employment, and President Donald Trump says the aim is to reduce the number of unskilled migrants and the number of family members a migrant worker can bring to the US.
The RAISE Act ends chain migration and replaces our low-skilled system with a new points-based system for receiving a green card.
The bill, if passed, would cut legal immigration by 50% over 10 years. Mr. Trump says it's the most significant reform to America's immigration system in half a century.
The RAISE Act prevents new migrants and new immigrants from collecting welfare and protects U.S. workers from being displaced. And that's a very big thing. They're not going to come in and just immediately go and collect welfare. That doesn't happen under the RAISE Act. They can't do that.
Crucially, the new bill would favour migrants who speak English, can support themselves financially and have skills that would contribute to the economy. At a press briefing, a senior White House advisor, Stephen Miller, told reporters it's one of the most important legislative changes in the US in years.
The President of the United States said, I am taking a stand today for American workers and the American economy, and we're putting American families first.
But immediately the RAISE bill raised questions about whether it favours migrants from the UK or Australia. Jim Acosta is a correspondent at CNN.
What you're proposing, or what the President is proposing here, does not sound like it's in keeping with American tradition when it comes to immigration. The Statue of Liberty says, give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses, yearning to breathe free. Doesn't say anything about speaking English.
I don't want to get off into a whole thing about history here, but The Statue of Liberty is a symbol of liberty enlightening the world. The poem that you're referring to that was added later is not actually part of the original Statue of Liberty.
The pair then clashed heatedly as Jim Acosta pursued questions about whether the bill would favour migrants from nations like Australia.
This whole notion of, well, they could learn, they have to learn English before they get to the United States. Are we just going to bring in people from Great Britain and Australia?
I am shocked at your statement that you think that only people from Great Britain and Australia would know English. It reveals your cosmopolitan bias to a shocking degree that in your mind, no, this is an amazing moment. The notion that you think that this is a racist bill is so wrong and so insulting. Jim.
Stephen Miller added that the new bill would allow immediate family members to migrate to the US, but with limits. And President Trump says it puts the emphasis on Americans first.
This legislation demonstrates our compassion for struggling American families who deserve an immigration system that puts their needs first and that puts America first.
Democrats are unlikely to support the bill in the Senate, with one senator describing it as a non-starter.
It's the ABC's Anne Barker. 30 seconds before the news, lots and lots and lots of feedback on Jonathan Coleman and his refusal to front on checkpoint. Philippa Little summarises what lots of you are saying. When you bury your head in the sand, your arse remains exposed and the kicking doesn't stop. You're just less prepared to deal with it. Thank you for your feedback. It's coming up to 6 o'clock.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui, good evening, ko Katrina Batanaho. The Labour Party says Martin Matthews had to resign as Auditor General because there were simply too many questions about a fraud carried out under his watch. Mr Matthews was head of the Transport Ministry while a manager, Joanne Harrison, stole nearly $750,000 despite staff repeatedly raising concerns about her. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Chris Bramwell.
Martin Matthews stood down temporarily in May while an inquiry was carried out into whether he was suitable to remain the country's top public watchdog. The parliamentary committee that appointed him ordered the inquiry, but is refusing to make its findings public. Mr Matthews announced today he'd resigned, saying he deeply regretted and apologised for the fraud and wished he'd been more suspicious. The Labour MP, Sue Moroney, says it's been obvious to her for a long time that all was not well with having Martin Matthews as the Auditor General, and resigning was the right thing to do. Atuiti whare parimata, ko Chris Bramwell aho.
The Prime Minister says he expects the Southern District Health Board to transfer cancer patients elsewhere if it can't treat them itself. Checkpoint has revealed 10 patients with prostate cancer have waited for up to 7 months for urgent surgery at Dunedin Hospital's urology service. The operations are meant to be done within a month. Labour says the service is not properly resourced and people are dying while waiting. Bill English, who visited Dunedin today, says the DHB is responsible for providing services and has targets to adhere to. He says if the Health Board can't treat the 10 cancer cases, it needs to make sure the patients get it somewhere else. Mr English says Dunedin Hospital has hard decisions to make as it goes into a major hospital rebuild. The head of the Urology Society, Stephen Mark, says the hospital has a crisis on its hands.
There is a crisis of patient care because they've got concerns about the inability to deliver the care in the time frames that they wish to do so.
Stephen Mark says he's offered his help in implementing the recommendations of an independent review of the urology service. The makers of the pain relief Nurofen are to pay $3.5 million in compensation to Australian customers who bought the pills that were sold with misleading claims. Rickett Benkaiser will pay the money to anyone who purchased the painkillers between 2011 and 2015 after it agreed to settle a class action lawsuit. The specific pain range claimed to target back pain, migraines, tension headaches and period pain, despite containing nearly identical ingredients to regular Nurofen painkillers. They were sold at almost twice the price of Nurofen's general product, and the company made $45 million in revenue from the range in 4 years. Rickett Benkaiser was fined $6 million for misleading the market, the highest corporate penalty under Australian consumer law. An independent third party will be brought in to divide the $3.5 million among affected Nurofen customers. About a third of inmates surveyed at Spring Hill Prison have been assaulted while in custody, but most have not told guards because they don't believe any action would be taken. The findings are in the Ombudsman's latest inspection report on the prison and follow last month's report of bullying and concerns about prisoner safety at Hawke's Bay Regional Prison. Michael Kropp reports.
In the survey of 562 prisoners, about half the respondents reported feeling unsafe and a third said they had experienced violence, but most hadn't reported it because they were not confident it would be dealt with. The report says double bunking and recent increases in prisoner numbers due to the introduction of remand prisoners had left staff stretched, placing systems and governance processes under pressure. It says dinner was served as early as 3:15 in some units, meaning prisoners had to wait more than 17 hours until breakfast. It says nicotine patches have become a tradable commodity, resulting in bullying and standover tactics. Call Michael Cropper ho.
The sacked White House Communications Director Anthony Scaramucci has announced he'll host an online event to tell his side of the story. Mr. Scaramucci was fired just 10 days into the job after an expletive-laden media interview in which he criticised senior members of the Trump administration. He says the event tomorrow, which will be broadcast on various live platforms, will give him the opportunity to reach and communicate with the president's base. In Portugal, a light plane has made an emergency landing on a packed beach, killing a man and a young girl who were sunbathing. Hundreds of people on the beach near Lisbon scattered in panic as the plane skimmed low over them before landing on the sand. The pilot and a passenger were unhurt and are being questioned by the police. It's 6:05. To sport, and the Lions are promising an abrasive approach against the Crusaders in Sunday morning's Super Rugby final in Johannesburg. The match will be played in front of a sellout crowd of 62,000 at Ellis Park, with the Lions set on becoming just the competition's second South African champions. Their coach, Johan Ackerman, says they'll need to counter a physical Crusaders team, but mustn't depart from the expansive style of play that's taken them to successive finals. Usain Bolt's chance of retiring with a win have been further boosted, with his closest rival, Andre de Grasse, forced to withdraw from the world champs in London with injury. The Canadian sprinter was seen as the most likely competitor to beat the Jamaican superstar in the 100 metres at his farewell meet, but has suffered a hamstring tear. And the successful New Zealand under-21 netball coach Kitty Wills will coach the Northern Stars in next year's ANZ Premiership. Wills, who recently guided New Zealand to the World Youth Cup in Botswana, will take over from Australian Junie Hornweg. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, mindfulness in prison. Dr. Ardavis Yono talks about the meditation course she runs in one of Kenya's toughest jails. Well, I guess they have a lot of time on their hands. There's a window on the world of nut allergies. Alison Balance seeks out the source of Kaikoura's mysterious bubbles. And this week's cultural ambassador, Mona Lynn Cortot, has another helping of Latin American music, this time from Cuba, on Nights from after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland, scattered rain, clearing overnight and becoming fine. Auckland to Kapiti, including Coromandel Peninsula, Bay of Plenty, Taupo, Taumaranui and Taihape. Mostly fine, however, a few showers in the east of Taihape and Manawatu from tomorrow afternoon. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, a few showers becoming more frequent tomorrow afternoon. Wellington, a few showers gradually clearing tomorrow. For the entire South Island, mainly fine, apart from isolated showers about coastal Marlborough and Canterbury, and for the Chatham Islands, occasional showers. It's 6:07 on RNZ National, and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina Batten. A report which led the country's top public watchdog to resign isn't going to be made public. Auditor General Martin Matthews resigned because of a critical report into his handling of a major fraud case. When he was the CEO of the Transport Ministry, a manager at the ministry, Joanne Harrison, stole $725,000 over several years. She's now in jail. Our political reporter Benedict Collins has been covering the story for months and has done very good work on it, Benedict, and joins us now live. Everything came to a head today with Martin Matthews resigning. Benedict, talk us through what led to that resignation.
Yeah, good evening, John. Hey, so what happened is 3 months ago, the Auditor General, there was an inquiry launched into his conduct. He had asked Parliament to hold that inquiry. basically, we sort of got news last night that this was about at a head, and shortly before 1 p.m. today, we found out that he had resigned. And when we put that news out at 1 o'clock, and very shortly afterwards, we received a statement from Martin Matthews saying that he had indeed resigned, that he was sorry about what had happened, and that he said basically he should have been more suspicious, that he deeply regretted what went on at the Ministry of Transport while he was leading it.
Benedict was doing a wonderful job, because you're getting the echo of yourself back in your own earpiece about a second later, aren't you, Benedict? It's horrific when that happens. In fact, I think we've lost him. We've lost him entirely now. So he's gone from having the echo of himself to not being there at all. We will go back to Benedict. We might just give him a call on the phone, old school styles. Let's move on. One of Dunedin Hospital's top doctors says it's unthinkable the Southern DHB is paying surgeons to not operate. Now, the acting head of the emergency department, Dr. John Campbell, says a lack of ICU beds at the hospital means surgeons are sometimes being paid to do nothing, because patients can't get post-operative care, so the operative doesn't happen. It comes after the chairman of the Urological Society of New Zealand described to us earlier in the program a crisis of patient care at the hospital, with prostate cancer patients waiting sometimes for months for surgery. But Dr. Chambers says the problems are widespread. He says patients are regularly queuing at his emergency department to be seen, with some waiting more than 24 hours before there's a bed in a ward.
Even to get into the department, sitting on stretchers at the door, which is very stressful for them and for the staff looking after them. And then at the other end, the hospital is completely full some days, most days at the moment, and people have to park literally in the emergency department for even up to 24 hours before they can find a bed in the hospital. And that's the whole system sort of backing up.
Are you underfunded? Do you have enough money? Is the Ministry of Health giving you the money and resources you need to do the job you want to do and are there to do?
I think we are underfunded. Not just the Eden Hospital, but the whole health system is lacking in funding, and that's showing up in our performance, I think, and also in what has to preoccupy the minds of our managers and our boards. They spend all of their time trying to adjust and fix the books instead of actually concentrating on quality of service to patients.
Is there a very real sense that there is pressure on to get the books right?
Absolutely. It's absolute pressure to get the books right. Depressing pressure, constant. As you know, the ministry are always sending these depressing messages to DHBs that they've got to get their act together. And that's all about the finances.
So therefore, does your CEO find himself between a rock and a hard place? On the one hand, he has physicians saying, hey, we want to do the work, and the queues are very, very long, and the stress and pressure is becoming immense. On the other hand, he has a commissioner appointed. He has the ministry saying, we're looking at your deficit. How does the CEO get the balancing act right?
I really wouldn't begin to know what to advise the CEO to do, John. I think he's got to do the best he can with the money that he's given. And obviously the CEO and the board and the commissioners have to ask the ministry for more money to help us get the work done. But also the ministry have to take common sense and realise there is a problem. I think one of the first steps to solving a problem is admitting that there is a problem. And there's no doubt that our health boards are struggling because of a lack of funding to meet the needs of our patients.
What's morale like? Because people want to do the work, right? You are there to make a difference, and we keep hearing of postponements, cancellations, and a real sense of frustration. Am I overstating the case in terms of the response of doctors and nurses working in the hospital?
Well, I think our nursing staff, for example, in the emergency department, their morale is high. They're tired, they're exhausted, and at times very stressed, but the morale is high because they're doing a good job. They're trying to do the best for people, and every day they make a difference to patients' lives. So our morale of our team is quite high in the emergency department, I'm sure in other parts of the hospital. But for people like surgeons, for example, it must be very frustrating. I know it's very frustrating for a surgeon to literally be paid not to operate. They have a patient requiring surgery, and they're literally told the theatre are ready, the surgeons are ready, and you can't operate because there's no ICU bed. And they literally have to do nothing. I mean, that's just unthinkable, isn't it, that a surgeon's being paid not to operate when there's demand for his skills or her skills. So I know the surgeons are very frustrated about these cancellations.
It's Dr. John Chambers, who is the clinical leader of the emergency department at Dunedin Hospital. We're going to stay with hospitals. We're going to move north, and cancer patients at a major Auckland hospital are missing out on timely treatment because resources are too stretched. Counties Manukau DHB, which runs Middlemore Hospital, is falling below the government set target that 85% of patients with a high suspicion of cancer must have their first treatment within 2 months. The most recent Ministry of Health figures for the 3 months to March show a quarter of patients covered by the target were not seen on time. The Cancer Society says those patients are the most sick and the problem is far worse than the DHB or the government is letting on. Rowan Quinn reports.
In a report to the board, the DHB's 2 acting chief executives say a record winter flu season's contributed to the problem, putting pressure on resources across the hospital. But the board's deputy chief medical officer, Dr Wilbur Farmelo, doesn't think flu's to blame. He says the latest figure includes a period where the board was struggling to get patients through, but in the last few months it's met the targets.
There's actually been a marked improvement in the way we've managed our cancer patients, and a lot of work has gone into identifying where the delays were and working at removing those delays.
But the Cancer Society's medical director, Chris Jackson, says it's unacceptable that a quarter of all those needing urgent treatment were not seen on time. And he says the problem of delayed treatment is much worse than the government and the DHBs are letting on.
The faster cancer treatment targets only apply to the very sickest of all cancer patients. The majority of cancer patients will be far worse off than this. So I think these figures are just the tip of the iceberg. There'll be many people sitting at home at the moment who know someone, a mother, a brother, a loved one, who has a diagnosis of cancer, who's waiting for their treatment, will know exactly what this feels like.
He says the government doesn't provide data on less urgent cancer patients, and that effectively means the full extent of the delays is being disguised.
There are many people who are referred to the hospital worried they've got cancer or who have a new diagnosis of cancer waiting for their treatment, who are waiting many months to even start on a treatment. Now, if you know you've got a cancer or are really worried that you've got a cancer and you're not looking at starting your treatment for 2 months or more, that is incredibly stressful and it's got to be bad for your outcome.
The DHB's Wilbur Farmelo says cancer patients are always the highest priority. He says though some elective surgeries been deferred by the busy flu season, no cancer patients are among them. In Auckland for Checkpoint, Rowan Quinn.
We're going to go back now to our political reporter, Benedict Collins, who's in the gallery, because there's a couple more questions we do want to ask him about Auditor General Martin Matthews and his resignation today following a critical report into his handling of a major fraud case when he was the CEO of the Transport Ministry. Remember, this is about Jonah Harrison. She stole $725,000 over several years and she was able to get away with it. Benedict, are you there?
I am indeed.
Right, you
on
can
the phone.
Yeah, lovely. You can hear me loud and clear. I'm going to miss you. I'm going to miss looking at you because your haircut was looking very Noel Crombie today, and I was enjoying it thoroughly. But the sound was horrific for you, so it's delightful to have you just via phone. You answered the first question I asked you, which is basically what happened. But the second question, and I think this is very fascinating, is what was the justification for not releasing this report? This is a senior public position. It's public money. Why no public report?
Yeah, that's right. So, I mean, we've been waiting for 10 weeks just about for this report to come out. And what Parliament said today, which is pretty remarkable, is they've said, oh, no, Martin Matthews, he received this report and, he responded to it, but then he resigned and that's the end of the matter. And we will not be making this report public. And we've just found out it cost $27,000, this report. And the politicians who appointed him, they don't want the public to see it.
So what is this OIA-able? Absolutely not. Is the Ombudsman someone you can go to? What happens next, Benedict? Because you're very good at ferreting around to get stuff that isn't being made public.
Yeah, so I don't think it is OIA-able, or it may well not be. So I'm not too sure, but there are numerous politicians who are saying, hey, this should be made public. It should be released because it's important, and and it will send a message, throughout the public sector as well, about what went on here and what's acceptable and what's not. Hopefully one of those politicians, lets us know.
Yeah, absolutely. Justice must not only be done, it must be seen to be done, right? And this is all about transparency and accountability. Has there been much pushback politically, or is there just widespread consensus that this was the right thing?
Yeah, well, I mean, so we've sort of had a mixed bag today. We've had, the Green Party, who are often in favour of transparency. They've been saying, no, we agreed with the decision of the Officers of Parliament Committee not to release this report. But then we've also had, people like Peter Dunn come out and say, hey guys, no, this is really important. It should have come out. And Winston Peters too, has taken that line.
Absolutely fascinating, Benedict. We look forward to seeing what happens in terms of the report itself. It does seem quite extraordinary that it's not being made public. Benedict Collins, our political reporter, joining us live from the gallery. A man who was abused as a child believes getting survivors to share their stories is one way to help tackle the nation's high rates of child abuse. Today marks 10 years since the death of Rotorua toddler Nia Glassie, who died after weeks of torture, which included being put into a clothes dryer. New Zealand has the second highest rate of child abuse deaths in the developed world, with one child dying every 5 weeks. Gemma Brackybush filed this report, which begins with an abuse victim who's now in his 50s and who wishes to remain anonymous.
My earliest memories, I guess, of abuses, I'm about four-ish. I remember my old man bashing my mum's head into a stovetop and blood everywhere, and having to clean that mess up.
Vivid memories that are hard to erase and ones that are often never spoken about.
I remember, 3 foot long, the hiss of a 3 foot long kind of jug cord. I remember standing in the toilet, pulling your pants down and seeing the blood running down the back of your legs.
The oldest of 4 children, he often hid his siblings under the bed to protect them from violence. He hopes sharing his story will encourage others to speak out too.
Not sleeping from Thursday nights through to Saturdays, because that's when the old man was drinking the most, so that's when the doors would get kicked in and the old lady would get a bashing, and we would get, or particularly me, would wear that. And you're going to school and falling asleep and not being able to perform at school. And back in those days, there wasn't much thought given to how a child might be struggling at school. You were just labelled, stupid or dumb.
He says people knew what was going on in his household, but no one said a thing. He's urging anyone who notices any signs of abuse to call police or services that can intervene. The Chief Executive of Child Matters, Jane Searle, says New Zealanders tend to have an attitude to mind their own business, which needs to change.
Often people are concerned that they don't have what they'd call the evidence. And the reality is, if you have a hunch and if you think something's wrong, don't act in isolation or don't just worry about the problem. Actually seek advice.
Jane Searle says it's impossible to get accurate figures of abuse because of what goes unreported. The man RNZ spoke to has gone on to have his own family, where violence plays no part. He says while talking about it isn't easy, it's a step towards opening a nationwide discussion.
Even now, to unlock the doors to even discuss this is a bloody hard thing to do. I'm 58 and I'm still struggling. I think more survivors out there talking about experiences and showing some of these young people that you can, that there is the sun can come up and it can be a different day.
He says for those who have grown up in violent families, it's about breaking the cycle. For Checkpoint, Gemma Brackybush.
21 minutes past 6, we're going to turn to sport now, or is it commerce, or both? Imagine being 25 years old and earning the equivalent of about 72 million New Zealand dollars a year. That's the eye-watering sum the Brazilian footballer Neymar is looking at in a world record transfer deal worth about $800 million in fees and wages over 5 years. Unbelievable. He wants to leave his current club Barcelona and move to Paris Saint-Germain. If it goes ahead, it will make him the most expensive player in history. With the details, here's the BBC sports editor Richard Conway.
A hasty arrival for Neymar at Barcelona's training ground this morning. But this slow-burning transfer saga appears to now be reaching a conclusion. After saying goodbye to his teammates, his strike partner Lionel Messi took to social media to wish him well for the future. Today's destination was unknown, but according to one of his representatives, the poster boy of Brazilian football is likely to be a PSG player by the weekend.
Yes, Paris made a proposal. They're going to pay the clause.
The planned deal for Neymar would set a clear world record. Back in 2009, Cristiano Ronaldo joined Real Madrid for £80 million. In 2013, Gareth Bale made a move also to Real for £85 million. Then last summer, Manchester United signed Paul Pogba for the current record sum. But at £198 million, Neymar's fee would eclipse them all. PSG are owned by Qatar. The Gulf state has a World Cup in 2022 to prepare for, but this mega deal is a sign that despite being subjected to an economic blockade by 4 other Arab countries, it will not be cowed or diminished in its international dealings.
I think what we've seen here is Qatar say, right, we want to be considered to be a serious power in the business of football. We can bring lots and lots of commercial endorsements to the game. We can have a much bigger influence on a global scale, not just on a European scale. And I say there's no finer example of doing that than signing one of the world's best.
Back on the streets of Paris, there's a sense of disbelief this deal appears to be finally happening, and so too about the price tag.
I like Paris, and I think he can make good things in this team. It's too expensive, but it's Neymar.
And so the stage is set. Paris Saint-Germain will likely welcome Neymar as their new leading light within the next 48 hours. This is the most political and financial of transfers, but ultimately he will be judged by what he does on the pitch.
That was Richard Conway. How good is Neymar? His stats say he was involved in 164 goals in his 186 appearances for Barcelona. Breaking news just happening via News Hub. Their reporter Jenna Lynch has reported that Materia Turei claimed to benefit between 1993 and 1998. I'm reading this off the News Hub website. The Habitation Index, that's an official public record of addresses collated from the electoral roll, shows Ms. Turei lived at the same address as her daughter's father, Paul Hartley, in both 1993 and 1994. Now, News Hub goes on to say that's significant. If she was living at the same address as her baby's father, she would not have been eligible for the benefit she claimed, the domestic purposes benefit. We just had Materia Turei on the line, but we've just lost her. Obviously, this isn't our story, it's News Hub's story, but we do want to get a response to it from her. I'm at the distinct disadvantage of having seen nothing more than the News Hub story on the website, but we did have Materia Turei standing by to join us live a short time ago, and I think we have lost her. So we are going to move on while we wait to get a response to what looks on the face of it to be strong accusations by our colleagues at News Hub. I'm just going to check because frantic dialling is going on. Oh, we've got her here now, and she's going to be put on line 2. Now, Materia Turei, are you there?
Yes, hello, John. How are you doing?
Good, yeah, good. I'm at a bit of a disadvantage because I'm just reading this off the News Hub website and I know nothing more about it than that. So it is not my work, but can you give us a response to News Hub's claims that the Habitation Index, that's an official public record of addresses collated from the electoral roll, show you listed at the same address as your daughter's father in 93 and 94 when I think you were receiving the domestic purposes benefit?
That was for the purposes of the electoral roll. I wasn't living in that house, and this will sound really dorky, and I totally understand that. But I put myself on the electoral roll there because at the time, for the 1993 election, my best friend was standing for election in that seat, and I wanted to support her.
What? Who was that?
Looking back on that now, it just seems like it sounds incredibly stupid. But that was why I did it.
Okay, I guess the question is, and it is material in the context of the discussions that you are having about your own history and the support you received from the state and what you were eligible to is, did you get the DPB when you were living with your partner?
No, I wasn't. I didn't live with him. So I was living in a different address. But I registered on the electoral roll at that address, which, as I say, looking back on it, was particularly stupid. But
was this discussed with? Did MSD ask you about the addresses today?
What they've asked for is for me to give a description of who I was living with at the various addresses, and I'll do that. They're sending me that list. But I wasn't living at that address.
Okay. Yeah. So where were you living in 93 and 94 at this time?
I was living at a different address. Okay. I was living, so it had been for quite a period at that point. And all of that is with MSD. They've got all the details of that.
Okay, but the Habitation Index says otherwise. So you're saying you put that address down so you could vote for somebody. Who was that?
My best friend, Katie Julian, who was standing at the time. And I really do recognise how this sounds. But this case, this is what it was like. I guess this is the kind of forensic investigation that your life ends up with when you're talking about your time on a benefit.
So if you look back on what you did that was inappropriate at the time, how would you describe it now? In other words, is there anything further you want to add to what is already, thanks to you coming forward, on the public record? No, I mean, this is the thing. You don't decide to disclose wrongdoing like I have, which was not telling Wins about how many flatmates I was living with in 3 of the houses that I was living in. You don't do that if you have other things to hide. You can't, when you're in a public office like this, you can't. It's everything or it's nothing. And so, you know, but the thing is, of course, that if other people are investigating your life in this kind of detail, all sorts of stuff is going to come up. So I'm not at all surprised by the information. It's what I did. I put myself on the electoral roll in that address because, you know, because I wanted to support my friend. It was the wrong thing to do, but I did it, and now everybody knows, and so be it. But the only thing I did wrong with Wins, the only thing, was I did not tell them the full number of flatmates that I was living with in 3 of the houses that I lived with during that time. And now I guess there will be even more rigorous scrutiny of your living arrangements. Are you going to be able to satisfy that? In other words, is there so... Because, boy, oh boy, if you were living with Paul Hartley, that does change the story substantively, doesn't it?
Well, I mean, I guess this is part of why I've exposed myself like this, as difficult as it is for me and for the people that I care about. Is that there is this forensic analysis of your life when you're a beneficiary. This is what it's like all the time, John, for everybody. It's nothing. So at the moment, I've subjected myself to it, and it is extremely unpleasant, but it is what people go through all the time, every day. And will I give you know, the full information about the people that I live with and the relationships I had? No, because I don't believe that anybody should be interrogated in their life to that degree. I'll talk with Wins about what they need to know. And I've talked with the public about my life. And, you know, other people are investigating forensically my life, and there'll be more of that, no doubt. But part of this is exposing what it's like. And when you're a beneficiary, it's like this every day.
Materia Turei, who was joining us live then on the back of this News Hub story that has just broken this evening. Thank you very much for your time. I apologise to Katrina Batten for going into her time. It is after 6:30. That is Checkpoint for tonight.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The Labour Party says Martin Matthews had to resign as Auditor General because there was